Patrick, welcome. I'm going to...
It's been a while.
It has been a while. And generally when we do these, I find a way to reference our dear departed friend, Jason Botchford, in some way. One of the classic, I know it's Curb Your Enthusiasm did the same thing, but Jason staple on the radio was, if it's not January 1st, don't wish me a happy effing New Year. So, this is the first video we've done in 2023, but it's the 12th, so I'm not allowed to wish you a happy New Year.
No.
But we will say
Happy Groundhog Day. How about that?
Absolutely. Well, we'll get to that in a second. So welcome, everyone, to Patrick Johnston and myself, Paul Chapman. Our Canucks This Week video. It's brought to you by Woody's RV. Patrick is there in Ybor City, Tampa, ready to go to the Canucks Lightning game on Thursday when we're recording this. If you happen to be in Abbotsford, check out Woody's RV or check out the website woodysrv.com, because our weather is completely different from what Patrick's experiencing. And you can get out of this soggy mess that we're in midst of yet another atmospheric pineapple express or whatever the hell it is. So yeah, check them out, woodysrv.com. We are very happy to have them as sponsors. And yeah, I was a little intrigued looking at some of their inventory on there. Patrick, let's get right to it. You and I often, when you're explaining to me what you think the story is or what you want to cover today, and we maybe have a bit of a back and forth, and we sometimes go over some stuff which I'm thinking, hey, that would be perfect for the video. And one of them is, for this team, the way things have gone is, as to throw out the first 7 games, that bad start that everyone knows was just so weird. But since then, it's like they look like they're completely out of it. No, wait, they're back into it. No, they're out of it again. Go for Bedard. No, wait, they're only a couple of points behind the Oilers. This seems to me like we're really at a precipice. They've beaten the Avalanche a couple times this year. They've shown they can compete in odd games, but they're in a slide right now. And I'm looking at the schedule, and it doesn't look like there are many easy wins there for me. After Tampa tonight, they go to Miami on Saturday, Carolina the next day on Sunday, and then they're back home for Tampa, Colorado, Edmonton, before they get the Hawks, the Kraken, who, while they're doing very well, the Canucks have owned.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty daunting schedule. Does where this team is right now feel different to you versus this stuttered start that we had up to this point?
I think more just in comparison to last year, and that's something I was looking at today, was looking at the numbers. And, after 40 games last year, they were in roughly the same position they are now. They were a 500 team, 500 team in terms of point percentage. But the perspectives are just so different. Obviously it's the same coach. They were Bruce Boudreau was, less than a month. Well, actually, that's not true. He was a month into his tenure when they hit 40 games, because there was a long COVID break. It was interspersed in there. And they were on an upswing. That this team probably scores a little bit better than last year's team. And that is the thing that, I think is hard to sort of take from all this, is that this team's pretty good. I mean, they're not a world-beating team offensively, but they're good enough. Like, they're a pretty good team. The problem is as we've said time and again, and this is why it feels so different, is they've been so atrociously bad at defending. Even you look back to those games on Tuesday and on Sunday when they were just completely blown out of the water by the Jets and the Penguins. They didn't get amazing goaltending performance by any stretch of the imagination, but if they could kill a penalty, if they could score a power play goal, in many ways, we're perhaps looking at different stories in both those games. But their special teams have fallen off a cliff. The penalty killing was never very good anyway. But last year they were just, it seems strange to say, a year where they were not very good at defending. They were better defending last year than this year, and that's just become the whole kind of thing. And that's where we're at. And that's why in many ways, we're recording this before they play against the Lightning. But that we're even having a conversation now that Oliver Ekman-Larsson's going to be a scratch, and that as we're talking, that seems to be the plan. That to me is it's a notable point perhaps in the sort of history of this team, because making that decision, a guy that is so much, it's such a huge cap hit, who they're just not getting any value from right now. And oddly enough, he isn't even the worst defenseman on the team statistically. There are team defensemen that are playing much worse than him, and that's part of that whole big story. And it's tough because you don't want to have to say the sky's falling, the sky's falling, the sky's falling. But this team is we're seeing in sort of stark relief the problem of this team and why, if they really want to be a contender. And I've had multiple people tell me they really think the Canucks, if they can make some really hard changes, and that means moving on from Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Tyler Myers, they could actually get in the right course. In 2 seasons, they could be a contender, given all the offensive talent they have. And if you find a way to get away from those 2 defensemen, you could conceivably even keep Bo Horvat. And then, things are all combining.
But how do you do that, Patrick?
I don't know. And I think, you're going to have to look at somehow you grin and bear it. You get through the end of the season. Tyler Myers has a big bonus to be paid in July. Once that bonus is paid, he's a $1 million in terms of actual cost hockey player. You could conceivably try to move him to a team that doesn't mind having a guy like that on the roster. I don't know if Arizona would be on his list. He'll have a limited no trade clause. That's what you're working with. It's 1 season left. He maybe you manage to do that. The Ekman-Larsson problem is so much bigger because I talked to the guy and this guy still enjoys playing hockey. He insists he's still happy out there. You can see it's not working the way it used to. He is a far cry from the player that even Jim Benning acquired. And Jim Benning believed that he could be this player that no one ever thought that he was going to be the player that he was in his mid-20s. But, there was this hope that he could regain some of what he's done. And he had a decent season last year. He actually did produce for a defense corps that struggled to produce. He was one of the better ones. And, he was manageable in a defensive capacity, but he's lost all that. I don't know how you solve that. I mean, he has a no move clause. It would take I can't even imagine what it would take trying to convince him to take a trade somewhere else. He likes living in Vancouver. He enjoys essentially the team he's involved with. And I just, unless you can make it, you're just going to sit in the press box all season, and that's why I wonder, are we at that point? And it's something that I think, that would be a harsh, difficult choice. But, if that's the future they need to contemplate, can they convince him to go on LTIR and just, they could manage their way around that? Could they convince him to just sit there and have my knee doesn't function, I can't possibly play anymore, blah, 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 and then give him a job that's involved with the team? Would that convince him? I don't know. I don't think so. He said to me last week, he's learned enough from past players. You keep playing as long as you can. Now, the question is, can he still play? But that's up to him, I think, more than anything.
Was Louis Eriksson one of those players?
Well, yeah.
No, it's funny, Patrick, because there's often a lot of ire directed towards the players, and I would ask any fan that feels frustrated by, these guys who have long-term bad contracts versus their diminishing returns. If someone offered you, $6-7 million a year at a set term, like, why would you walk away from it? I mean, a GM gave him that contract. Another GM thought, yeah, we'll take that on. And the play famously in a lot of pro sports, you're paid for your past success. You sort of earn that in the future for what you've done in the past. And it's a law of diminishing returns. But I don't, you and I, again, we had a little back and forth this morning. When I look at this team, and we've been saying for 4 years, we knew the blue line was a problem, right? I mean, great. They drafted Quinn Hughes. For the first time, unfortunately, we know what happened with Luc Bourdon, but this is something that historically the last 3 to 4 general managers have not addressed, the lack of depth on the blue line. They tried to address it in the offseason. They couldn't because, again, you're painted into a corner. But if you look at the forwards that they have, whether it's Besser, Garland, Miller, Horvat, obviously, Pettersson, there's a lot of good pieces there. But they do sit, and I know their games have been entertaining. They're a little bit up and down, and they can score a lot of goals, but they're only 14th at the moment in goals for. We know how horrible they are in the back end. You said they were defending better last year. You watch them a lot more closely than I do. Goaltending to me is a big part.
In relative terms.
Goaltending was a big part of that. They're not getting, obviously, even before he got hurt, Demko was nowhere near the level he was playing at last year. But that's where I look at this team and say, is there enough talent within the forwards that you could, if you can figure out a way to solve the blue line, Could this team contend quicker, or is there bad chemistry on this team? Keep hearing whispers, keep hearing you talk to some of the same people I do. This doesn't seem like it's a good mix. All the stuff that Bieksa
Yeah.
talked about when he did that impressive speech about the intangibles, about why they cared, the extra stuff they did, why that group in 2011 came together and why they cared about each other. Is it just winning? If this team could turn it around, would you have that? Or is this just not a good mix of personnel?
I think it's a bit of both. I think a lot about, remember that speech Stan Smeel gave, right? Like, it wasn't just Kevin Bieksa. It was Stan Smeel talked about having pride in what you're doing, and pride in your group. And I think I find myself thinking, I think honestly with this team, I think it's a case of, everyone, I would say almost every player I've ever encountered has a pride in what they do and in the group they have, right? But it comes down to what your own actual understanding of that compared. We all have our own understanding of what that means. And in some cases, that understanding, in compared to how others, and we may not really ourselves understand how the other person understands it, but they may not actually get it. And that is possible, especially in when you're losing. It stands out starkly. When you're winning, as I've always said, you can manage through personalities a lot easier when your team is winning games. And I don't think they're playing bad defense because they don't get along with each other or because they don't have a pride in what they do. I think they're simply just not good enough. And that comes back to my original point, which is that you've got all Ekman Larson, you've got Myers, two guys who've had long careers. And you get old at some point, and the body doesn't function the way it used to. I mean, you and I know that very well. You more than perhaps anyone. And
I think it was a shot.
Yes. Well, you walk better. Let's say you walk better than you used to. But
it depends on how many drinks I've had. But
yeah. But I think more than anything, it comes down to just it's an ability. It's a team it's about ability. There certainly are disparate personalities in that group. You look at a guy like Brock Besser, who has, I think, been playing pretty well of late in the midst of everything. He scored a pretty gritty goal on Tuesday against the Penguins. Again, a guy who perhaps isn't as quick. I mean, he was never quick, perhaps not as quick as he used to be, and that is an issue. But a guy who's, things were going badly, and of course, as we know, there became this very public discussion about trying to find him a new home, something that he certainly wasn't happy to have come out in public. I think I certainly don't think that door has changed. I think it's still open. I think the idea of him being in a new place is very much on the table. That's going to be part of the discussion. Those kinds of players don't generally. I mean, Bo Horvat too didn't really want to have it come out publicly. He didn't want to talk about his situation, but inevitably it's going to be there. Players, they don't want to end up being in the media at all in general. I think they just want to show up and play. They understand the shot of being in our market, but they talk to us a lot, and there's a lot of questions asked. But when it comes to sort of team unity, and sure, I mean, we've all heard we've all heard cases of things where these guys aren't getting along or those guys aren't getting along, and I certainly don't have the sense that they're at each other's throats. I think some guys are better friends with others than they are with than other guys in the room.
It's not that open, Patrick.
Yeah.
It's not about dysfunction, and certainly I mean, you and I have been around this. You've referenced my physical ailments. I've been around this a long time, and I've been in a lot of locker rooms where you hear these things talked about, and winning cures a lot of that. You can have completely dysfunctional locker rooms, and I know to some, just much like life, athletes are different. Some guys may really care about the guy next to him. Another guy might not care.
Yeah.
Doesn't care if he's playing next to an asshole as long as he produces. And if the team wins, then yeah, that solves a lot of that. I guess the issue there is, and you had highlighted this in a game last week, when you look at things that are, whether it's hits, whether it's blocked shots, Like there's that effort, right? Like
Yeah.
everyone eulogizes the Sedins, rightly so, because of what they meant to this
Yeah.
franchise and what
Yeah.
they gave to the franchise. When to everyone, it was laughable when Torts asked them to block shots and kill penalties, but they did it.
Yeah.
They did it because they had that pride. They had that every time they went out there. And this is what I've seen a lot of blowback from Canuck fans. And I know you've talked to some of them and you're doing a sort of a mid-season report card for the weekend, but you know, there is that attitude about how much you care and what your pride is, and fans are like, I'm tired of hearing the clips. I'm tired of hearing Bo Horvat speak. He says the same shit all the time and nothing changes. And I'm not pinning that on him. I'm just saying fans are done with it. They're done with hearing the hollow quotes if it doesn't match what you're doing in the ice. If you're going to say we need to work harder, we need to do this, then you damn well better be throwing your body out. You better be creating that energy out there. You better be blocking shots. And I think when fans see that, that's the disconnect to go, how much do these guys really care about each other? Or how much do they really care about the fans or the franchise or the game or any of those things?
And I think there's definitely something to that. You know, I mean, it was funny. I heard a story today, you know, going way back about, you know, essentially in the days leading up to the 1994 Grey Cup. And this is a story you'll appreciate. Players that were wound so tight and so hyped up to win that they end up, you know, Lions fighting each other over the training table.
Oh, that team was famous for it.
You know, right. And that team was at odds with each other, but they got on with it and they won a lot. And they were, you know, they are one of the great teams in Vancouver sports history, right? You know, that's an example of you know, would you call that a fractured dressing room? I don't know, but they won. So who cares, right? It you know, that in many ways, like I said, I think we talk about this because the team hasn't been doing well. And I think the point about whether they're getting in front of enough shots, whether they're playing, you know, they're playing smartly. I think, you know, we saw the turnovers last week, right? I think about all the awful turnovers in the game against was it Calgary, you know, or Winnipeg, you know, like just some really poor decisions have been made, and that's just about ability, and that's about sort of focused. But when you see a team have 3 block shots, and obviously they haven't had a game like that since, but when you see a team block 3 shots in a game, you know, that very much is in line with what those, you know, those concerns are from fans. Fans want to see passion, they want to see effort. You know, I mean, oddly enough, this is a team that's, if I'm not mistaken, are leading the league in fights. You know, I mean, I don't know what that means, but it obviously isn't lining up with how you know, I think fans are feeling about this team, which is that they're in it to give it their all. But this is a team that is willing to get in someone's face, you know, one way or another. But I think it's the fact that everything feels so disjointed that at the end of the day, they keep bleeding all these chances against. You know, this is one of the worst ever sort of defensive performances that we've ever seen in Canucks history. You know, let alone the fact that their goalies haven't been great, but that the environment in front of them has been so atrocious. You know, that speaks to disorder. The fact that, you know, obviously, like, you know, the players and coach, if they had the answers, they wouldn't be playing like this at a certain level, right? But that they don't really have any other answers. You know, every day, it speaks, I think, to the relationship. And I talked to the players about this a little bit today. Is, you know, how do you guys keep the spirit up? And yes, I get it. Every day is a new day, and you try to, but you know, you get up and you're like, oh, God, you know, and it, you know, how much does it weigh on you? And you know, I think they're getting there. You know, but you know.
So let me ask you this now, and this goes back to my original point. When I look at the schedule and I look at where the team is right now, it does almost feel like we're at a tipping point. They're either going to drag themselves back into it and be like, no, you can keep hope alive for a little bit longer, regardless of how much that annoys the Connor Bedard fans out there, or you know, this is going to stretch into probably the worst period of the season. There were reports earlier in the season that, you know, we all know ownership's involvement in this. You hire the coach before you hire the GM, and is there a disconnect there in who they want? And then famously, Jim Rutherford goes on a radio interview and essentially alludes to the fact that, you know, it's not his guy. You know, the team wasn't prepared, going blah, 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 all this stuff.
Yeah.
That certainly, to me, could impact a locker room. They know that the guy behind the bench who's really trying to get them to buy in is not going to be there. He's not going to be the long-term guy. I'm not saying it's on purpose. I'm not saying they're not trying for this guy. I'm saying that there's a feeling of waiting for that shoe to drop. What's your sense that we're either going to see a coaching change before the end of the season, or that we will see significant movement of personnel before the trade deadline?
I mean, I think one of the things that was pointed out to me recently is if you think carefully, in a couple weeks, all of a sudden teams are going to actually have accrued enough cap space that they can really start making moves. There's not a ton of teams that have a ton of cap space, but there's a number of teams that have some. And then, of course, the way the salary cap works is that it's a year-long budget, right? You can spend this much money on salaries, and there are ways to manage your way through that to get yourself some savings. So, I think obviously we're still a month and a half to go until the deadline, but I think we are going to start seeing in general some movement. Nobody's been making trades like that. There's just nothing happening. Everything you hear is literally everyone's just counting their pennies so carefully that everyone, every team that is going to be making a trade is sort of priming themselves, but they're not ready to do it yet. But I have every reason to think there's going to be movement in the league, starting soon. And there is little reason to think the Canucks won't be involved in that, because they certainly have been making calls and talking to people, and certainly have been going around trying to build lists and trying to figure out what they're doing and who are players they're interested in and who they think will make the team better. Whether Bruce Boudreau gets let go, I have my doubts. I mean, unless there's a candidate that is so obviously the guy or gal, I suppose, but it's going to be a guy. Unless there's someone who's obviously there, I don't think they're going to do anything until the summer, because there's no if they do make a move, it will be what I've kind of pondered since almost American Thanksgiving, that there's essentially pondered points to ponder, a mercy killing of Bruce Boudreau, just put him out of his misery, and they promote Mike Yeo or Trent Cull, to run the show until the rest of the season. But I have a hard time imagining, because the tendency here has been, in general, as we've seen, has been to move slowly when it comes to personnel management. And I think unless, like I said, there's an obvious candidate standing there doing, waving the flag outside the door, ready to go to work, I really get the sense that they're gonna play a wait and see game, and once the field's a little more wide open, I certainly think they have candidates in mind. There's absolutely no doubt about that. There's always the connections made between, let's say, a guy like Mike Bellucci of the Penguins, who, Jim Rutherford was one of, if I'm not mistaken, hired him as one of the first people he ever hired, working for the Carmanos family, working for the Whalers and CompuWare and all that. And Mike Bellucci was hired for essentially their youth program, then became a junior coach, and Jim Rutherford knows him very well. He's an assistant coach for the Penguins. People, of course, love throwing around Rickard Grönborg's name because he's Swedish, and of course the general manager is Swedish. But we'll see.
Everyone's Swedish in this organization.
Yeah, I know.
So we'll wrap this up pretty quick, because I know you got to get to the rink. But there's not enough storage space in any iCloud out there for us to start a discussion right now on the problems with hockey culture. But I will say, I even go back to when, they were having problems moving Roberto Luongo's contract, and yet you see teams like Edmonton that have needed a goaltender forever, and that's been a weak point, and it's never addressed. There's this conservative nature to hockey guys that, like career hockey guys that are in the network, and they're petrified of making a mistake or taking too big a risk. And I look at, do you want to win a championship? And the LA Rams are a perfect example. They went all in and they traded picks, and they have the least salary cap room this year. And yeah, they were hit by injuries this year, but they went all in 1 year and they won a Super Bowl. You can have that argument whether it's worth it or not, but they won a championship. And I look at the players that the Canucks could have available, whether it's Bo Horvat, maybe Demko when he comes back. I know goaltending is an issue, and I'm not suggesting that they would move him. Brock Besser is another guy. Maybe it's one of the defensemen. Maybe it's a guy like Shen or even Bear. They've got some good pieces there. If you're a GM there that's in the mix, it just always stuns me how few are willing to swing for the fences and say, I'm going to be really aggressive. Yeah, you can have 1 or 2 picks or whatever it is and a prospect. I'm going to get this guy because I know he can help me win. Who would not want Bo Horvat on your team? Whether it was the Leafs trying to get over, it's just, it's stunning to me. But this is hockey, and we know it never happens, or rarely happens.
Yeah.
So I'm with you on that. I think they have pieces, and we're going to continue to talk about it. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the roster come the day after the trade deadline.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either. I do think there is going back to last summer, I mean, they've certainly been open about the fact they did try to make trades on defense. And I think clearly they were trying to move Tyler Myers. I think we would love to find a way to move Oliver Ekman-Larsson, but like I said, I think that's going to be a tough one to do.
Yeah.
But I think, I think there had been perhaps a way to move Myers in the summer. I think it's probably more difficult now. He hasn't obviously had a very good year. But maybe there are still Tyler Myers believers out there. But other than that, I mean, I think certainly Luke Schenn is a guy that I think everyone has their name labeled as a guy that's clearly a player that, I think just with the way he's improved and the way he's sort of found really kind of fine-tuned his game as a sort of the dependable depth defenseman. I think he's going to be of interest to many teams. The Horvat, I mean, I talked to one person. They're like, no, Horvat absolutely 100% is the trade chip right now. He's the number one guy. He's the guy that everybody's going to be calling on. He's a guy that really wants to stay. I mean, I'm going to write a little bit about this on Friday, but I talked to him today, and we talked about sort of the big picture, and I just, obviously he doesn't want to talk about his situation, but to his credit, was willing to. No, he loves it. Vancouver's been very important to him and very special to him, and it's the only place he's ever known. And I think, everyone has the first job, the first place they feel truly loyal to. And sometimes that's our first job, sometimes it's our 6th, 7th, 8th job. He's in that place where this is the first job, and if it ends up ending the way I think we think it's going to end and he ends up somewhere else, he'll be fine. He'll move on and he'll get to play playoff games and on and on and on, which, he in the end is his desire. The guy wants to play for the Stanley Cup. He would like it to be here. There is absolutely no doubt about that. But, in the end.
What was your first job, by the way?
My first job, well, it depends how you count. My first job was I was a landscaper. I worked for a guy, and then I ended up with a job. I actually worked at BC Rugby as a high school job, and then my first real full-time job was I pumped gas at Mackenzie Heights Esso at 33rd and Mackenzie. It's not there anymore; it's a condo complex. But did that, and then cooked, and then
Excellent.
on and on and on and on. Anyway, there we go. I'll
let you go and say my first job about 10 blocks due north from here. The P&E selling peanuts, popcorn, and ice cream, Canucks, Lions, and Whitecaps. My loyalty will always be to the P&E. All right. Before we let you go, we're going to include this Tampa game, which almost everyone will have seen before they see this video, but we'll include it in Tampa times 2, Panthers, and Hurricanes in the next week. How many of those did the Canucks win?
1.
I thought you were going to say 0.
No, they're going to pull one off. The Panthers are a disaster. They're a disaster in so many ways. So I think
blame Drance.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Enjoy the game tonight, Patrick. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks to Woody's RV, woodysrv.com. If you're in the market, summer can't get here soon enough. Check them out. They got some good stuff there. We will be back for you next week. Leave comments for us. We'll try and answer them in the video next week.